I'm Liz Martin. My husband Matthew Glenn and I farm Muddy Fingers Farm, about a 3-acre mixed vegetable farm. We grow for CSA, for farmers markets, and for restaurants. We have about 80 to 90 CSA members in the summer, about 20 to 25 in the winter, then this year 2 farmers markets a week. The Natural Resources Conservation Service was giving out hoop house grants to encourage people to grow in hoop houses. They were hoping to see that people were spraying less, being able to reduce the fertilization, and also to see farms bring in some more income. Generally, hoop houses are not a big investment, maybe $3,000 to $7,000 sort of is the range. But they pay back pretty quickly. In the field, maybe I could grow 4 plantings of something, but in the hoop house, I might grow 6 plantings of the same thing throughout that period. So I've essentially created more space on my farm with my hoop house. When you grow crops in the hoop house, it extends the season on both ends. So it warms the space up earlier, and it also keeps it warmer later in the season, so that it gives us a good extension to our season and a longer income from the crops that are grown in there. We tend to use it for getting the earliest of high value items to market. We, in fact, have used it for beans several years, put a bed of beans in there and have good success with having the earliest beans at market. People are usually really craving beans after a winter of not having local beans. So that sort of thing has been great to have early, or the first cherry tomatoes, because people are ready for it to be local. They're tired of getting it from California at the supermarket. We tend to use it for tomatoes and peppers and eggplants, which all do much better in the hoop house. I think we make about 3 times as much. So pretty much crops that either like extra heat or that you want to have early for a market advantage are great crops to start with in a hoop house. Another advantage besides extending the season of summer crops is winter greens can be grown or at least kept alive all winter, depending on the severity of the winter. So they don't, especially during the darkest days of winter when there's less than 10 hours of sunlight, they don't grow a whole lot. But once you get beyond that, they'll start growing again. And if you have greens that are big enough entering the winter, you can actually sort of warehouse them as in like living refrigeration and harvest them to bring to market. So that's another big advantage of a hoop house, is to be able to have winter greens. A lot of local farms are starting winter CSAs because they're able to have greens now. You have to choose your crops carefully. There's a lot of hardy Asian greens and spinach that do quite well. Some lettuces aren't hardy enough. But the seed catalogs are really starting to get into that area too, and there's a lot more seed that's bred for overwintering. Spinach that's been grown over winter is sweet and nutty. It's delicious. It's fresh. It's really vibrant versus something that's come in a tractor trailer truck across the country. The advantage of growing in a hoop house is that you control the environment within the building. Technically, a hoop house is an unheated structure. It blocks the wind, protects the crops from wind, protects them from too much moisture. You're providing the ideal amount of moisture by irrigating within the hoop house. It can be vented if it's too warm to allow some of the heat out. We use hoop houses to help deal with disease, especially tomatoes. We have a big trouble with a disease on our outdoor tomatoes. The dry conditions of a hoop house are really great because the leaves never get wet on the plants, and a lot of tomato diseases are from wet leaves. So that's been a big help for us. Septoria leaf spot and early blight are both problems we have in our field, and we almost never see in the hoop house. Cherry tomatoes out in the field, you have a rain and all your cherry tomatoes will split the day of market or the day before market. But because you can control the moisture in the hoop house, the watering is always very even, so the tomatoes are always the same moisture, and you don't have splitting and popping and cracking problems. When you grow crops in the hoop house, they get much bigger. So tomatoes and cucumbers, for example, will often grow up from the floor all the way up to the top and sometimes back down to the ground again. But we find that we have to prune them and trellis them to keep their growth upright and let them get the most amount of sun they can. When you're choosing a hoop house, there are a zillion to choose from. Seems like the basic styles are Quonset, which is sort of round, like an arch. They shed snow, we found, fairly well. We don't live in a snow belt where we're getting 4 feet at a time. People who live in snowy areas often buy a Gothic-shaped hoop house. The top is a peak so that the snow sheds off that pointy peak. That's supposed to help clear snow more efficiently. In general, hoop houses come in 4-foot increments because the bow spacing is usually 4 feet, especially in a place where there's a snow load. We have permanent beds on our farm. They're 100 feet long. So we wanted a hoop house that would pretty closely cover what we already have. So we went for a 96-foot model. Most of the farmers who farm on our scale seem to have either 21-foot wide or 30-foot wide houses. I've heard people say that with a 30-foot wide house, the outer edges aren't as frozen because there's a bigger surface area. There's more growing space. We haven't noticed a lot of trouble with frozen soil in our hoop houses at 20 feet, but I've heard that's a factor for some people. Since our farm is small, we don't have that many places to choose from. But when you're choosing a place to put a hoop house, it seems like there's 3 considerations. You want to keep it relatively close to your base of operations for management purposes. If you want electricity, for example, for an inflation fan between the 2 layers, you'll want someplace close for that. Close to irrigation source is good. You want a relatively flat spot. I think that the NRCS program wants you to put them someplace with 0 to 3% slope, I think. It makes it a lot easier to install when they're flat and level. We really wanted a mobile hoop house. We wanted to be able to move it to help with our crop rotation. So you start to worry about diseases building up in the soil after you've grown, say, tomatoes year after year. So we liked the idea of a tunnel that we could just move, and that would really help with our rotation. This house, we asked some friends to come over and give us a hand, and basically in one morning, we had the whole structure up. It's a neat design. We just really loved the ease of assembly. It's 24-foot sections that you stand up across from each other at about the right spacing. They were pre-drilled, and you just set pre-made bows right into that, and that was the infrastructure that holds the hoop house up. The other houses we put up have had stacks of metal, and you have to keep them all straight and know which one goes where. So it was really nice to have this really simple, there's 3 parts, stand 2 up, put the 3rd hoop-shaped one in between. So we really love that. After all the structure was built, the spines, we did put a purlin in. Purlin being like one piece that goes the whole length of the house to give it stability. This house has 1 square purlin at the top that we attached each of the sections together with to give the building some stability along its length.
You okay there?
Then we just had to find a way to attach it to the ground before we put the plastic on, and we used grape augers, what grape growers use at the end of their grape rows. It's like a big screw, it screws into the ground, and then there's a loop on the top, and you can attach the structure with the loop. Once we'd anchored this hoop house to the ground, then we were ready to put the plastic up. Plastic for a hoop house is rated in mils. It's usually 6 mil is sort of the standard that people put on. There's all sorts of fancy plastics in terms of anti-fog or anti-drip. In terms of how long the plastic is expected to last, the manufacturer generally says 5 years. The method we have used every time we've put plastic on is to roll the plastic out alongside the structure. The windward side is best, and then spread one edge up. And then we've tied like a tennis ball inside the plastic. We toss those over, usually in 2 or 3 places, and that allows us to pull a rope and pull the plastic over the side of the hoop house. Usually you try to get a couple people on each corner to anchor it. Really key thing is a still day to put on plastic, and it depends on your site. Sometimes those are very hard to find. We tend to have a little bit of wind here. Now, if you get a gust of wind, the day we were putting the plastic on this tunnel, we did get a gust, and it took it clear off the other side, and we had to start over. So, I mean, that happens pretty frequently when you're putting plastic on a house. You'll just get enough of a gust that the whole thing goes right over, and you have to start over. Our plastic is all attached by this miraculous device called wiggle wire. has a channel that's sort of U-shaped, and then you screw that to the structure. Then a little wiggly piece of wire fits into that channel and locks it in tight. So after we've got the plastic pulled over and hopefully held down on all four corners, we'll put the wiggle wire on. It's like a miracle. I don't know who came up with it, but it's fantastic. It's really very strong, and it holds the plastic on through some incredible winds. The tighter the plastic, it seems like the better it wears. If it's loose and flappy, it seems like it gets beat up by the wind as it goes up and down in the breeze. So we found tight plastic to be really important to get it to last a long time. Seem to be three maintenance things to think about. One is the plastic. Of course, if you do get a tear or a rip, fix it right away, because if it gets flapping in the wind, it can get to be worse. There's a Hoop House plastic repair tape that really does a great job. I'm always amazed how strong it is. Snow removal is really important. They shed somewhat, but we've seen lots of pictures of collapsed hoop houses, so we always are careful to shovel it. We just use a roof rake when we have maybe 6 or 8 inches, depending how heavy it is. Soil is a consideration. There can be a buildup of salt, especially for people using chemical fertilizer, which is relatively salty. They say that eventually you can get a buildup in your soil of salt. Even with compost, they say that eventually you can get a buildup of salt in your soil. So when you change your plastic, it's good to leave the cover off your tunnel for that winter and let the snow and rain really wash that salt through the soil profile and decrease the level in your soil. We grew 2 to 3 times as much in the hoop house as outside. You grow nice stuff in there. It's pretty disease-free. It tends to be bigger. For our farm, because we're small and our farm is fairly land limited, we try to get as many dollars per bed foot as we can because we don't have a lot of spare room. So the more hoop houses, the easier it is to do that. They're really sort of profit centers on our farm, places where we can grow really valuable things.